For here. I just wait for that to come on. Okay, I will call the January 17th, 2019 meeting of the Housing and Economic Development Commission to order at 6 p.m. We're now in session. First item of business is the call to order. We just did that. Okay, let's do roll call. And I'll just go left to right. Commissioner Dupuy.
Present here.
Yeah, present here, whatever you want to call. Commissioner Jenkins here.
Joy Chuck.
Chuck.
Brian Finley present.
And Brian Finley. So we have 4 commissioners. We have quorum. We will now move on to the approval of the agenda. Any, and actually, let's do this. We'll move for approval of the agenda, so I'll take a motion to approve.
A motion to approve.
Motioned by Commissioner Chuck.
Commissioner Finley, second it.
I never know how formal I should be or not. And Commissioner Findley seconds it. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion, any changes to the agenda? Staff?
Chair and Commission staff does not have any changes to the agenda as presented.
Okay. And Mike, I was going to say the video that we have, we can put that in under 5A, put it under the business engagement program? All right. So seeing that, we'll look for a vote of approval on the agenda as presented. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? Passes ayes all. With that, we'll look for approval of the minutes from the September 20th, 2018 meeting. I'll look for a motion to approve.
I move to approve.
So I have a motion from Commissioner Dupuy. Do we have a second?
I second.
I have a second from Commissioner Chuck. With that, any discussion, any changes, additions, subtractions? Didn't notice anything. Okay, seeing nothing up here, we will look for a vote. All in favor of approving the minutes as presented signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? The motion passes ayes all. With that, we'll get into new business, and Mr. Martin, we'll hand it off to you.
Sure. Thank you, Chair and Commission. A couple brief items to start off your meeting tonight. The first one is a summary and feedback report on the 2018 Business Engagement Program Report. You did receive copies of that report with your agenda packet. If you needed another copy, there's some extras at the back of the room that you could take on your way out tonight if you would like. This report was presented at the November 1st Community Engagement Breakfast, where the St. Paul Area Chamber of Commerce presented our program results and talked a little bit about the program. So to start us off here, our communication staff has put together a video that highlights this program, and I think I'll just hit play and we can take a look at what this is, and should give us a pretty good overview of what occurred this year.
We are a research, design, and development firm. The company is Modern Catheter Technologies, and we've been in business a little over 5 years.
Our business serves seniors in our community. We do in-home senior care.
Why Maplewood? One, some of our owners live here, including myself. We realize that a lot of the operators that work in the medical device field, specifically what we do, they live around this area and they're commuting all the way to areas like Plymouth, Blaine, and so we figured it makes sense for us to be here where most of our operators are.
I think it's a good central location for us. You know, it's easy to get to for most of our territory.
You know, Maplewood has always been seen as a strong retail sector, but we also know that medical, not just both medical office visits, but medical devices, equipment, development of those type of resources is an emerging industry in Maplewood, and we want to see that grow.
I think it's fantastic that the city has started to reach out to work with us.
Being able to hear, what our challenges are and what our business is, I would imagine that could only benefit us.
Most of our communication is in a reactive mode. Here's a project, what are your thoughts? But if we already have an established relationship with a business, with a manager, someone on site, well then we can kind of get to the point and have a better, more effective conversation right away about a difficult issue.
Every single one of the businesses that we visited had a positive working relationship with the city.
We're always looking to, find new ways to help our operators in there to become more efficient. For example, lean manufacturing, something that we've been wanting to implement. Maybe the city can come in, we can collaborate, they can help us find out, okay, here's the people that you can collaborate with. Here's a grant money possibly that you can write and see if you qualify for it.
I think businesses who are in Maplewood choose Maplewood, either choose to stay here or choose not to move or choose to start their businesses here, is because the city is responsive, the regulations aren't too burdensome, and there's a lot of opportunity.
We're also getting feedback that businesses are primed for growth here. They feel that Maplewood is a place that they can grow and create more jobs and create a home here for their business, so we're very pleased with that. So, it's kind of fun, especially for the folks that have been on this commission for the long haul, to see, the time that we spent in discussing how to best approach this program, get it developed, and then kind of see as the city's evolved in its abilities with the communication staff and how we can message what we're doing. To see that little few-minute video, take me out of it. Everything else is great. But that's fun to see. But I do want to highlight the report itself this year had 3 recommendations, which we can discuss as the commission would like to in depth, or as much as you would like tonight. The first one is to, of course, continue the program, but to consider as who we pick for the businesses that we interview or visit with. The chamber is recommending that we look at businesses that have what they call touched the city in some aspect in the past, whether it's pulling a building permit, a license, had a land use planning application before the city for consideration. So some form of interaction with the city has already been established to kind of follow back through and see both the survey of how those services were performed, but also then the general other questions that we've been accumulating through the program the last couple of years. In addition, the last recommendation, just to jump ahead, was we have the Maplewood Business Council series, which we've been essentially doing 3 times a year for the last, year or 2 years. And then to bump those up to potentially 6 or 8, I think some of the discussions that we've landed on at staff and formally with the chamber is perhaps 5, and then because that kind of gets you on a regular rotation with the events that we already do. Like the breakfast and the state of the city type events, so that those kind of count as part of our regulations or rotation. So perhaps we're doing one every other month, but looking for feedback from this group too, to see what you think should be moving forward. And then that second recommendation from the chamber would, again, to continue servicing or providing the engagement program, working with the chamber on a regular basis as the agency that coordinates the visits and ensuring that the people involved are conducting the visits. So again, working with the chamber on another round of those visits. So really, just wanted to provide a kind of a background as to what got us here today with the report. And there's several pages here of background information, charts and data that you can really dig into, but looking to hear feedback tonight from the commission on experience with the 18 program and what we should be considering moving forward to 19 and any other general comments. So with that, I'll turn it back to the commission.
Okay, so let's open it up for general thoughts, especially, were you able to engage with any of the, so yeah, first of all, what were your thoughts on the visits? What are your thoughts on the program just in general?
Yeah, so first, I do think we already discussed this at some level in the last meeting. Happy to talk about it again. You know, I think my concern in general is that we're doing this once a year, and there's probably opportunity, especially, you know, depending on how the initial meetings go, to have this be a more routine, regular connect with these businesses. Or in my case, I went to the school district, and there was a lot of, I'm connected with these other towns, I'm doing this here, I'm doing this there, I like this, I don't like this. But then how do we build that connection throughout the year? It might be, you know, I know we have these events, but not everyone's going to them. How do we, I don't know, I just felt like it's like we almost go through this on a yearly basis, but then how do we have more of a long-term relationship in some cases?
So when you say "we," are you thinking the city, the commission?
The whole project, I would say, between, you know, ourselves, city council, you know, I think it's good that we do. I just feel like it goes, and then I don't know what comes out of it, you know, if something necessarily always comes out of it.
I would say the school example is probably not an optimal example, because they do engage with the city on so many different levels and so many different places. From a business committee, you know, or commission, you know, it'd be interesting to know, Mr. Martin, if other cities, do they have any type of a revisit? I mean, we're obviously looking at that as part of the recommendations, not for businesses. We've honestly only been visiting for about 2 years, but, you know, just to see how people are maybe doing it, if there is re-engagement. For what it's designed to do and all of that, I'm comfortable with it, but yeah, if we have an opportunity to grow it and deepen it, that'd be interesting to hear.
Sure, and Chair and Commission, the school districts were part of the 5 entities that we established that were important enough that we do that yearly. So as part of this program, but as Mr. Jenkins is referencing, like, I have a meeting with the school district at their headquarters next Thursday, and, you know, we're constantly meeting with them as an entity on several projects, and Jason as well, on both school districts. Roseville's going through all their renovations now, and North St. Paul Maplewood's about to enter that phase, so there's lots of interface at different levels with the city government here. I'm not acutely aware right away of other programs and how they've done a revisiting aspect of it. I think it's something that, yeah, we should keep in mind. We need to be mindful of the business's time as well, because some know, like, getting one visit out of 1 year can be a big challenge as well.
Right.
But, you know, as you've said, we've been doing this 2 years essentially in this form. But maybe once we get a few more years in, it might be then an appropriate time to start revisiting past agency or companies that we've already kind of pinged.
Well, I think there's a lot of good discussion here, but I sort of have to agree with Dennis in that I took last year's report out and I looked at this year's, and, you know, it's kind of the same stuff. There's nothing new in terms of the recommendations or the findings. You know, sort of the same thing where we don't know what we don't know. The business is saying, we don't know, you know, what the city offers, where we can, you know, have some synergy. And I'm not sure if we've done that. Kudos to the video, too. Sorry, I was going to say that first. But, you know, it's like some of the communication pieces. Have we done anything to put some of that together? Have we, you know, not just a visit, but just kind of an ongoing conversation?
Well, Chair and Commissioner, I could respond there too. You know, I know out of a handful of the visits, there had been some questions or concerns or things to look further into that, you know, staff did continue the discussion with whatever that business, like I can remember specifically, and this was in the first year, Second Harvest, had some questions before they made their announcement on building a new facility, was there land available to do something similar in Maplewood? So we had that continued discussion after our engagement visit. Now, that doesn't get captured in a report by the chamber as far as what they're hearing under their survey questions, but there is additional feedback if that visit warrants that. It doesn't completely surprise me, you know, after 2 years that we have a report that kind of gives us similar results, and I think that then helps further proves that these are what the business community is then feeling. Now, we chose the businesses under both years with the same kind of selection criteria, businesses that are primed for growth. And that's why I think the chamber had the recommendation of pivoting to looking at a different type of, or group of businesses to select from.
Commissioner Finley, I just want to chime in and agree. I think that's an excellent move to pivot to, I believe the terminology was businesses that have had a touch point with the city. I think that's an excellent idea. I take it as a compliment in some ways that it is similar results. Overall, the report, right, is a positive report, right? Overall, I'm not saying we're perfect, but overall, businesses are pleased, and I'm glad to hear that when we went back a second year and talked to some other businesses, we got a consistent. So it wasn't just a fluke accident that we got a good report. That we've got 2 years of data now. With a consistent positive report, so that's encouraging. But yeah, I like the idea of trying to connect with businesses that did have direct dealings with us. This may open up or uncover some new material. And I will close by echoing that, yeah, I think businesses have plenty of other things to be doing, so we don't want to wear out our welcome mat. So I like the structure where we're going, and I'm not feeling a need to switch it up, mix it up too much.
Right.
And I'll just pivot, I guess I'll add one final comment. The special events, for lack of a better word, that we're having, the State of the City meeting and the meeting here this month, we want to kind of keep those specials. If we start adding too many more, then they kind of lose their draw.
I guess my thought with the meetings would be just to make sure, maybe this is already happening. Let's say we had a good meeting with whatever business, make sure we're inviting them or making a conscientious effort to involve them where we can. Not necessarily have tons of meetings with them or add things to the calendar, but try to encourage them to be involved, yeah.
And to Dennis's point and Joy's, and Joy called this out, is one of the points that's pretty much the same this year as it was last year is businesses aren't sure how to engage with the city or when events and stuff are happening. So, 1 year to the next, I'd keep my eye on it. If we talk to businesses next year who have already had a touch point with the city and we still get the message, well, I'm not sure what's going on or I don't feel that communication, then we definitely need to look at it. We have a little bit of the complication, and I don't know if maybe we would put this under staff presentations as an agenda amendment, but we do have, my understanding is still an open position on staff for it was a different pivot, but Dewey's replacement.
Yeah, sure, Chair and Commission, yeah, correct. The city is in a recruitment phase for a community development director.
And that, of course, they're going to come in with a vision and knowledge of how other communities they've worked in work. So, we certainly want them to be aware that we've got a great business community, we've got great results. But at the same point, I'd at least make a note, we probably have room for growth when it comes to communicating with our business community and letting them know. The opportunities are there, but if they're not hearing about them, we need to improve on that.
Yeah, and Chair and Commission, just for background, and this is a little in the weeds, but like the groups of businesses that were included in this report and last year's were all invited to like the State of the City and to the engagement breakfast. We don't get a lot of turnout from those businesses that come to it, but they were personally invited to those. And then as you saw with Kevin in the video today and the entire communication staff, the 3 guys back there, we're growing as a city and the ability to do things beyond our monthly newsletter that gets sent to every property in the city.
Yep. Yeah, we're certainly improving our communication and our outreach, so, but worth noting that some of our businesses, haven't quite caught up yet, or we haven't caught up for them. So, let me see if I'm going to pull up those recommendations so I get them in order. I think the first one you wanted, though, was do we continue, right?
Yeah, Chair and Commission, there's no formal action required for this item, but just if there was, I know we talked about it in September, in general, how the program go this year, and now we have the actual report, so we wanted to bring it back and afford another opportunity, since you've seen the reports, and maybe engage at the breakfast in November, if there's general thoughts that you think we should be considering.
Well, and I think we should have the conversation to help inform staff and council as to what this commission's thoughts are on those recommendations. So, I mean, as far as continuing the program, having been around long enough to remember how it was in years gone by, this is, yeah, not to minimize all of the sweat and blood and tears you put into it, Mr. Martin, but I think this works better. I think you probably have more time to do other things with this model. And the other cool thing about it is with the help of the St. Paul Area Chamber, we're getting really good data and metrics. And this year especially, that helped inform our comprehensive plan process. Now we have business information that helps us go in and say, what do our businesses think? Maybe it's 36 businesses this year, but over the past 2 years, but we've got some feedback which we didn't have in the past. So I am absolutely an advocate for continuing it. I don't know if anyone thinks otherwise or has concerns on that.
I guess my question would be, is there a significant cost to the city in this partnership?
Chair and Commission, I don't have the exact figure, but it's been in the ballpark of $10,000 to $15,000 a year to partner with the St. Paul Chamber on this and other events.
Then second recommendation, remind me, was that the pivot to the different business models?
Chair and Commission, actually, yes, that's a second recommendation. In order, they were flipped.
Oh, okay.
But it doesn't matter. But yeah, you're on the right track.
A second of the three.
Yes, there you go.
And I'm perfectly fine with that. As I don't know if there's any direction on what type or level of touch point, though. Is there a goal, a certain piece of data or metrics they're trying to find with those touch points?
Well, I think part of it would be just, Chair and Commission, the idea of a business that had to interact with the city and getting some feedback on, was that a positive interaction? If not positive, was it at least effective? Those kind of data points. So, if we're gonna use, like, say, building permits for one example, I think, we can look at it a couple different ways. It both can be the property owner, but it also could be contractors who actually usually pull the permits. And there's a couple contractors that are located in the city that could provide maybe both perspectives. So I think we'd try to hone in on who's going to provide effective data, good or bad. And that's just under the permits and one consideration, but there's a couple other areas of the city services that we could kind of figure that out.
One of the things I would ask us to be very cautious about, meaning let's make every effort to not cherry pick the good experiences. I know when we had this project in-house years and years ago, some of the best conversations we had were with the businesses that were on White Bear when Ramsey County was doing that project. That was a Ramsey County project, right? Yep. But Stillwater Avenue, the grocery store, when we were doing that road. And, you got feedback on how did the road crew go? How did the project team communicate with those businesses? And, in both cases, there was a bit of a challenge with the White Bear Avenue location. It happened to be a Ramsey County issue, but we were able to respond to it quickly and get that taken care of. Stillwater Avenue, rave reviews over how the project was handled and how that went. At the same point, if there are areas where, we can discover if there's opportunities for the city to do better, I would love to do that too. So if we can come up with a process to randomize that selection somehow, not just pick the good ones or the bad ones, but let it go random and see what we see.
Yeah, Chair and Commissioner, it would be, at least at the beginning, our expectation that the chamber would provide us with the methodology of how they wanted to do it, and we provide the data for them to select, since we're the owners of the potential database, but that, you know, we're right with you in that we're not in this as an exercise to just find good feedback. So we'd try to work on a system with the chamber that would provide some random aspect to it.
Okay.
Just a quick question. And the chamber, they do this with other communities too, like Roseville, Vedness Heights. And so we have some consistency. And then if we were to compare data with, you know, the surrounding communities, we have that basis. So, I mean, I think that's a reason why that partnership is strong. Thank you.
Any other thoughts on the second one, switching it up? And I'm sorry, Mr. Martin, what was the third ask?
The third one was regarding the business council meetings, chair and commission.
Oh, okay.
So they are requesting or suggesting that we increase it from a quarterly to 6 or 8 meetings is the verbiage that was included with the report itself.
Yep.
And that's, you know, for people that attended, so that there's a little more regularity to it, that they expect, every other month, or, you know, if we eventually get it to every month, we know we're going to, say, the MCC on the third Thursday morning, or whatever it may end up being. So increasing the number of business council meetings. But on the staff's perspective, we're interested in that, but we also know we put on 2 fairly large events already, and so we're just trying to find that right balance, because it is a staff dedication time to do that as well. But for the business council meetings, the chamber does take on a good portion of that.
Give us a general thought, because unfortunately this is one of those events I don't get to go to on I think actually at all yet. Give us a thought on how the attendance is. I know early on it was rather weak, but are we seeing the same people meeting after meeting? Are we seeing variety?
Chair and commission, you know, it's been varied, but I think we're gaining some kind of a regular attendance of like 15 to 25 people. But, you know, one of our first, not the first, but maybe the second one, there was just like 2, you know, so.
Takes a while to grow.
It takes a while to grow, and again, it's not anything the city has ever done. It's not anything that the business community is necessarily thinking that, you know, like, because we're not a chamber, and yes, we're partnering with the chamber, but when you're in other, even Ramsey County communities, there's more of a community built around, or a culture around that chamber that serves that area, and that's never really existed here in Maplewood. So we're starting to try to work with the St. Paul area into building that expectation. So I don't have too much concern that if we have more meetings that they're not going to be well attended. But yeah, it has been generally the same folks, I think, attending most of those meetings, kind of the same pool of people.
Joy and myself are on that North End task force group, and I think it's really cool to see, you know, the businesses that are participating, that they are involved in, you know, putting time in for that project. So I guess my thought is, and again, this may already be happening, is if you have a business that, let's say, is participating in that, or is participating in something else with the city, how do we make sure they know about these events, right?
Sure.
I don't know if they always do, or maybe they hear about it, they forget about it. Is there some?
Yeah, chair and commission, as soon as we get like business contacts that they've gone to an event, we have this ever-building database and emails, and so anytime we hold an event, that's one way where they're getting, it's called Constant Contact, is the software that does it. And so they are getting message that these meetings are occurring, either through us, and then the chamber has their own outreach as well that they conduct.
Right, so if they've been to any event that has chamber participation, they're normally getting hit at least twice, once by the chamber, once by us on that. Of course, at the State of the City, we also had the North Side Plan there, so people could learn about that as well. My thoughts on the frequency of it, and actually I'm going to refer to a comment that City Council Member Smith mentioned at Monday's meeting. This was, I don't remember if it was after the meeting, but the comment was, loved the State of the City address, but we would have loved to have had more time to mingle, to network. State of the City meeting, you know, it's a lunch, it's middle of the day. We understand that not everyone can hang out for half an hour afterwards, but if somehow in the program we can add that networking time, I know that sometimes is more valuable than, hearing a speech from the council members or the city manager as a business event goes. We certainly, love to hear from our council members and our city manager, but from a business perspective, if we can build in some networking time, I think that makes those events a little more valuable as a business event does. That may make the business engagement lunch more valuable, the state of the city. My first thought was if we went to like every other month and then you made at least the business engagement breakfast part of that swing, if you will, of meetings, then really only have 2 more to add. State of the city, we still absolutely talk about our businesses, but maybe that's not on the same way, maybe that's not on the same level as the business engagement or the business council goes.
This is Commissioner Finley. I volunteered briefly with the Stillwater Chamber, Greater Stillwater Chamber of Commerce, and networking I learned from there was a huge thing that businesses want to do. Maybe we do look at adding because Maplewood doesn't have a Chamber of Commerce, right? We're part of the Greater St. Paul, and so maybe we look at scheduling some event that is strictly dedicated for networking. I mean, we just simply call it the networking event and notify all businesses out there, and then those that are interested can come, and maybe that's what we look at. Because, obviously, like you said, the state of the city, that's a pretty limited time frame. It's pretty, other than you can have the official start time a half hour early and put on the agenda that, okay, this is the official networking time,
But you're still asking a business to spend 2.5 hours instead of 2 hours, with the model.
Right, I kind of think it's almost better to maybe just create a networking event and let the businesses know it's out there, and those that want to do it, here's your chance, and see where it goes. It's worth a try. It's a very low-cost suggestion, I guess.
And I think it's networking between businesses, but also networking businesses and different people from the city would be my thought. I don't know if it's networking, but, they have questions, concerns.
Is there any business or task or what other things happen at the business council that either take staff action or also maybe bring value to the city as far as information, networking on our own staff's behalf? What are some of those things in the business council that, what I'm looking for is I'm looking for a justification why we would do it more often, especially if it's sort of the same group cycle after cycle.
Sure. Well, we've brought projects like the North End study, the comp plan. Those are the 2 notable ones. But we brought projects like that to and the brush line has come to gather feedback and to present items from a business community point of view and get that kind of feedback. So that's really been the main takeaway. But there's also been sessions where it's more informational, like former Chief Schnell talking about public safety at the mall and in general, and some philosophies or things that businesses could be incorporating. So it's more of a 2-way discussion there, but not really to elicit feedback to put into a city process. But yeah, so it kind of works. It's it's either going to be informational like that example, or we have a project and we'd like to get feedback.
Does staff think there are enough projects like that where, I absolutely see the value in getting community, especially business community input, but are there enough projects in a year where we would justify doing that, or are we going to get some meetings where it's, sorry for the phrase, but just a networking event?
Sure. Chair and Commission, I think we're comfortable with at least for a year trying, to increase the amount of events and see if that does become an issue where, we don't know what to talk about now.
Right.
Part of what we've been discussing internally too is that for those that have been the last 4 years involved in the creation of all these events, these have all kind of happened in conditions on their own. The breakfast was a condition created for a certain set of conditions. So as the state of the city is now the business council. There was not a cohesive thought of what are we doing And so this year, we're wanting to internally step back and ask that question, but also then get other departments more involved instead of just being a community development-led activity and seeing, spreading that ability to gather information to all departments and then also contribute to those discussion topics. So I think there's a little bit of movement on change and broadening out the scope and seeing how it works.
Okay. My thought is if staff is interested and has the resources to expand on it, I'm never going to say don't engage with our businesses and don't look for their feedback. So I'm certainly on board with it. I just want to make sure that, we expand it to the level that we're still getting value out of those events.
Yep, and the key, that one key finding, sentence that I kind of come upon where I think it's important to have, city resources is, and here's what the report said, a common theme during the visits were that companies might not know what they don't know. The proactive outreach of the city could encourage more utilization of city resources. And it's sort of a spin-off of what was said last year, too. And that's what I was hoping was coming out of some of these Maplewood Business Council meetings where, the city interacted with businesses. If they had questions, how do I do this? Or do I have to apply, if we're going to be, looking at this expansion or whatever.
Chair and Commissioner, I think that's an idea that staff would consider looking at, kind of those how-to sessions. The only counter that I initially think of is that people that are engaged enough to come to these meetings probably know how to engage the local government to answer those questions, and so they're looking for something, I think, a bigger topic to dig into is my sense of what, based on people who are attending. But it's not lost on us that there could be better communications, whether it's in that type of meeting or on our website, or even, we've been working with communications to develop videos and getting Jason in front of the camera and saying, here's how you apply for a building permit and here's what's expected in the process. So, we are looking to how to better utilize all our different avenues for getting that kind of word out.
Okay. That's great.
Cool. Any other thoughts? Okay. One of the things actually I just came up with too, it may not be a bad idea, and I've just got the page up on my tablet right now, I'm looking at it, if on our own HEDC page, there was maybe a link to business resources, whether it's the development team or whomever with the city. Not complaining, but the 2 or 3 calls I get a year going, I want to build a shed in my backyard. Who do I talk to? How'd you get, oh, yeah, I'm on that page. Okay. So maybe there's some opportunity there to then, we have one spot. Yeah, and it's housing and economic development, right? So both housing and economic development contacts. Then we have just one location to refer them to as opposed to knowing all of the specific departments that might be able to help. Okay, any other thoughts on the engagement program? You got good discussion for staff? Cool. With that, I think we'll move on to 5B, Housing and Economic Development Commission Rules of Procedure, Annual Review.
Sure, Chair and Commission. Before I dig into this item, I did hand out some comments that were submitted by Commissioner Unger, who was not able to attend tonight, and so this was the first item he did provide some feedback on, and then really the other item is the rental licensing that we'll be talking about in a few minutes. So just wanted to point that out, that he had some comments there. The rules of procedure, groups like the Planning Commission, it's already built in that they are required to review those annually, so I wanted to take an opportunity to do the same with our community development staffed groups. So you're one of those 4 groups that we staff, and so I want to make sure you had a chance to look at those at the rules of procedure. So we have done so for quite a few years. So long, in fact, I believe, is this right, that every other rules that I had, we had to change the department name, but on this one, it was already in place, so we were good. But anyway.
That's probably the last time we changed it, is when we changed the day,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So, and I also wanted to add into the opportunity for this group to look at these every year. It's not meant to be an exhaustive review. They're pretty straightforward in the end, but at least it provides like an annual reminder of here's how we operate, here's kind of the nuts and bolts of the commission and how we come together and make decisions. So with that, the few changes that are highlighted in the attachment of the rules, changing the date to reflect what we're actually doing as far as the meeting time. I had it changed from, it said planner, as far as your staff liaison, changing that to community development director or designated replacement, essentially because there's not a full-time planner position that's called planner at the city anymore, so we'll just put it at the director level, and then they can designate who is in charge of preparing the agenda. The most notable change is to the agenda, where currently you have on your agenda visitor presentations. This came up at the city council, or I'm sorry, at the planning commission in their discussion, because they were having visitors under their presentation section as the code or as the rules would allow, but the city council has eliminated visitor presentations from their agenda, so you're not able to unannounced come to a city council meeting and say whatever you want. So the planning commission wondered if that was appropriate, if the council wasn't, that all their commissions would then do so. And so the directive that we received on staff was to work through each of the commissions to take the visitor presentations item off the agenda, and that's what we would propose moving forward. Now, a couple notes to that. That still doesn't mean if a group or an entity wants to present for some reason in front of the HEDC, well, you know, if it's like an economic development association or a transit project, they would still work with staff to get placed on an agenda before a meeting, not that they would just show up anyway. But if there's still ways, it's not that it only can be city official business or initiated business that would be on the agenda. The second item, that once the meeting starts, it becomes the chairperson and the commission's meeting, not our meeting. So if you want to suspend your rules or you want to amend your agenda because something happened in the room that you want to address, you're free to do that. But this just takes off the item that anyone could come, show up, and I'm just being flippant to keep the discussion broad, but talk about baseball if they wanted. Like, this keeps your discussion focused so that the meeting runs more effectively. So that's our recommendation there. And then we are changing election of officers, which we're looking at tonight, to better reflect what the practice had been of at least initially addressing that item in January. So with that, staff can take any comments or questions from the commission, but staff would recommend that the HEDC would recommend approval of the rules revisions. And just to reiterate or state, the city council has to approve all recommended revisions to the rules of procedure for this group and the other commissions.
Is the reason for meeting quarterly just based on the amount of material doesn't warrant more frequent meetings? That's kind of the appropriate pace based on the number of topics that would fall under this committee.
Sure, Chair and Commission, it's a combination of the amount of items that we are seeing that needed addressing and staff time, staff availability. We have, you know, essentially myself and one other person that staffs the 4 commissions at this time. So as I know, I've talked to a couple people offline, potentially with this department, since I've been here, has never had a full-time director. Maybe that helps ease up the ability to do more. It should, and then if the work warrants it, this group could then potentially be meeting more.
And then,
So let's do this. That's a really good point, and I have some comments on that too. Do we want to focus on that? Do we have thoughts about quarterly or that section? Any other thoughts from commission members?
the other thought I have on that is, if for some reason the meeting, I feel like did we go the fourth quarter without a meeting? I don't know if something comes up, is it, instead of just canceling the meeting, does it make sense to move it to a different date? I don't know that that's part of the rules, but.
We have done that around holidays, as this mentions. So I'm not worried about that.
Well, and I think that we've always been flexible enough that if we had something to add, Michael would say, we need to meet, another time because we had to address something. My question was just quickly around, why did the city council take out visitor presentation?
I want to jump to that. I want to stay on this one because I think we'll have a good discussion on that one
Okay.
too. So any thoughts on the quarterly? My only request was going to be to just tweak the language a little bit and say a minimum of quarterly or meets quarterly and, as business
Where
work.
it's needed.
Where needed or something like that. It's a double-edged sword. I don't want to tell potential commissioners that there may be meetings they don't know about and they sign up and instead of quarterly, it's monthly. But at the same point, I don't want, I want to know that we're going to meet at least quarterly. And then to Joy's comment, there are times where business might say, we need to do another meeting because of the business breakfast or because of something else. I just want the language to say it's not a hard 4 times a year period. There may be some variable other meetings as requested.
Sure.
So back to Commissioner Dupuy, who I'm sure is going to get to visitor presentations maybe, and if not, I'm sure someone else will, but were there other items on there too you wanted to address?
Besides visitor presentations?
No,
or
no,
including-
besides, no, I'm just saying, we sort of did a wrap on the
Yeah.
4 times a year.
Yeah.
Back to you, you were going through it and I stopped you.
No, so
I'll let
I was
you
going to talk about that
continue.
one, and then I was going to also jump onto the visitor presentation, so that would be the next one.
Where would you
So-
like to start?
Well, I think Joy, I want to kind of hear the answer to Joy's question, because I was thinking the same thing.
Right, I just would like to know the reasoning behind why the city council decided that they didn't want to hear from constituents.
Well, Chair and Commission, I'm not going to speak on behalf of the council. I think there's some documentation in the meetings themselves that you could understand, go and review and understand their discussion points. There's maybe others that would feel comfortable that is familiar with that discussion, but essentially, there were meetings that were not staying focused and taking more time than maybe both the council and then other people that were here for business items were comfortable living with, I guess. I don't know what the right terminology is, but the meetings were kind of losing track and losing focus, and so they thought that it was an appropriate move for them to take it off their agenda and encourage people that needed to speak to their council to do so more directly than within the meeting construct. And I just, not to derail this conversation, but the meetings, again, the quarterly comes back from, that's your ordinance, your enabling ordinance that was originally approved when this commission was created. That's what it says, that the commission shall meet quarterly and at such other times as necessary. So the expectation from the beginning was quarterly, and then, again, as Mr. Jenkins mentioned, as we needed. But, yeah, it's a policy decision on the visitor presentations. Staff, to be honest, probably is fine either way. It's the policymakers that made the decision that they didn't feel it was appropriate or needed to have that as an agenda item.
Yeah, I guess, the few visitor presentations that we've had here have always been pretty constructive, and I think the person that was always chairing always kept it very focused and things like that. So I just, not having gone to city council meetings, I don't know how often they get derailed, but I know we've heard, some interesting feedback in this council when we've had visitor presentations.
And I'd say,
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I have been to some city council meetings over the past year, not all of them, but a few. And I know at some point, they were, limiting your time for a speaker. And I think that's what the other Dennis, is pointing out in his comments here, that there may be other ways of making sure this is something that's orderly versus removing it from the agenda.
Chair and Commission, the policy of the council has actually been in place for quite a while now,
Yeah.
likely more than a year. They still hold
say
public, 2
two
years.
maybe.
they hold public hearings. That doesn't, it's not that they're not taking in any feedback, or even if the mayor decides a particular agenda item in a new business that they would like to receive feedback, they still do that. And yeah, the clerk will have the 3-minute timer to manage that. What this is getting at is, again, just someone walking in and wanting to talk about whatever they wanted to talk about. You know, what you probably have been seeing then with the timer is that we're receiving comment based on this topic, and we're only going to talk about this topic.
So I'll jump in. I'll still try to be diplomatic, maybe not have to be quite as measured as city staff on this. I've been attending city council meetings for 10 years, and the policies and the procedures, and in all honesty, the civility and behavior of those visitors in those presentations have been across the board and well off of it in some cases over the years. Well, I probably can now say as of Monday at about 7:30, the prior administration chose to eliminate the, as Mr. Martin said, the person just coming into the meeting to make comments. If you have prepared statements, if there's an agenda item that welcomes public comment, you're certainly welcome to talk about the road that's going to get redone in front of your house. You're going to get to talk about the business who wants to expand their parking lot. But if you just wanted to come to visitor presentations, in city council, they wanted a more controlled atmosphere, because sometimes it got way out of control. My position, based on the the 10 years we've been doing visitor presentation here, is probably we've had 5 people in 10 years. And I will say all of them have contributed value to, value that I think, should be on the video record, should be noted. Yes, there are times though, and this is where I'm going to, opt in favor of Commissioner Unger's comments. There are certainly times where a preset of rules would make it easier for chairs to handle the visitors different, better. I know, as I've chaired it, I've always been very comfortable in making the decisions I've made to how much time they'd have, how much interaction we had with them. So I'm comfortable with that, but I know we've also had chairs that had no idea how to handle it. What should I do? So I think some guidance, but my request would be, if we as a commission have any say in it, and I'd even go to a vote if staff needs, or if, it does say motion, I would ask that we keep visitor presentations, but we adopt the time limits. And the city council's time limits are 3 minutes for public meetings. I would say that we adopt the same time limit for visitor presentations. And then to Mr. Martin's comments, as chair of the meeting, the chair, with the consent of the commission, can always suspend the rules and say, you know what, the visitor we have in the room with us right now, if he wanted to speak for 4 minutes, you know what, I'd be more than happy to listen to the chief for 4 minutes. So as a commission, we have that flexibility as well. But I'd like the guidance of a 3-minute rule so that it doesn't fall completely on the chair's shoulders to say, you were mean, you only gave me 3 minutes. No, I gave you what was allowed.
Sure. Chair and Commission, what this will likely lead into is a discussion from the council on where they would like to go. Why this again came up is because Planning Commission was experiencing some of the similar occurrences that the City Council was. And our staff's perspective is we just want it uniform. We want all commissions to operate under the same mechanism. And so that's what we'll be asking for at the end of the day, wherever the council would like to go, that it's uniform.
And Mr. Martin, I understand that. This is one of those areas where I feel very strongly, but I'd like to see the rest of the commission's thought, because if we stand united, then we'll make it tougher on council. If we're divided, let's we have to vote on it and we'll recommend what we recommend. Well, we start over.
Commissioner Finley, I have no strong opinion one way or the other. To to me, it's just, as long as you have a tool to limit a person, we all know scenarios where someone can just go off the rails, and there needs to be a tool in place to rein that in. How you get there, really, I'm happy to defer to how city council wants to structure it.
Yeah, I just don't think one size fits all. I would like to vote to keep the visitor presentation because I would like this council, this commission to, you know, be inviting to people who have valuable comments or, you know, information that they need us to hear.
And I completely agree with that. I would feel very uncomfortable removing visitor presentations, especially given, you know, my year that I've been here, you know, we haven't had one. So I think we're very far from having a problem on this commission. And if there was a problem or if we foresee the possibility, then I agree, you know, with this idea of putting a time limit that could help, you know, reduce the potential for a problem. But I do feel it's important that people have the ability to have their voice heard. And, you know, if this is one small forum to do it, I support that.
Well, I do agree with Mark here. We adopt the time limits and be flexible enough to say, oh, you can keep speaking. Because I think we do have to have a tool, but I want people to feel comfortable in being able to come.
Were there any other items in the rules that we wanted to address, have discussion on?
Well, I'm curious I'm glad that we're reviewing this year, right? But I'm curious if it hasn't been reviewed in several years and that's part of the rules. How do we make sure this is reviewed on an annual basis if that's
Chair and Commission, to
important?
clarify, it has not been part of the rules.
Oh, this is new.
That's
I
why
see.
it's-
That's why it's highlighted.
Yep, I get it. So I actually like that piece is on there, even if it's just a quick, you know, no changes.
Commissioner Finley, I just want to clarify a comment you made, Joy. I would agree 100%. We want people to come. This is their opportunity, their forum. Thank you. Correct me if I'm wrong. This doesn't remove the ability to communicate. It does put a burden on the individual that they have to schedule it ahead of time.
Chair and Commission, either ahead of the time or be relevant to the topic that you're discussing. I still don't see, like, say someone came about rental licensing and wanted to talk about it today, that you wouldn't allow them to talk about it. I would still think, and that would be the chairperson's decision under the rules of procedure and the Rosenberg's rules, but I still think you would let them speak likely, so that doesn't prohibit that.
And actually, aren't we now under Robert's rules? Did we go to Robert's a
All
couple years
the
ago?
rules of procedures are Rosenberg, so we can double check that, but it was my understanding that we're Rosenberg.
Because I know we were originally Rosenberg's. I thought we went to Robert's at some point, but
Yeah, we can
in
double check.
either
yeah.
case, the commission and the chair have the flexibility to do it. My concern about removing it is there's no language that tells the public that their voice is welcome. There isn't anything in the agenda or that even says they can speak up about, you know, the rental housing piece in here. City council, if you follow it enough, you know there's public hearings where public comments are welcome, but there's also plenty of discussion that does not welcome citizen input. So, yes, the chair always has that flexibility, but there's sort of a very long-standing, you know what you can speak about at city council and you know what you can't. Here, there's nothing that gives any direction, so I think I would like to see visitor. And one of the other things we could do to help make it more comfortable for those people coming to do business, if we wanted, we could move visitor to the last item on the agenda so that, one, the visitor can hear the whole meeting before they speak. But if there are people here who want to conduct business and don't want to have their time derailed because of, you know, a filibuster by a number of visitors, you know, they can complete their business and move on, and visitors then have the whole meeting to reflect upon if they do want to make 3 minutes worth of comments. Does that, moving that, does that help, or is that not non-issue? if we move visitor presentations to after staff presentations?
Are they not already at the end of the meeting?
No, they're actually before commissioner, stat, and staff, or commission and staff presentations.
Yeah, that's right. I missed that. I would agree that visitor presentation should certainly be at the end.
Is just the terminology visitor presentations, is it clear to the public that is a time where someone can come and speak? To me, when I see visitor presentations, I almost think there's an organized visitor that's invited to speak.
With most public meetings, it's pretty much understood this is sort of open time. I mean, someone could come in and talk about a business project that we haven't heard about yet. They want to buy some property or whatever it is. It's still up to the chair to say, that's pertinent, you've got your 3 minutes. It's also up to the commission and chair to go, I'm sorry, your parking ticket you got for parking overnight on your street really isn't applicable to this commission. We'd ask you to move on.
I'm aligned with moving it to the end. I think that makes sense.
So is there any other changes, thoughts on the rules? What I'd like to see a motion on, if one of you agrees, is let's approve the rules with the edit of D2, the agenda. We restore visitor presentations with 2 changes. We add a 3-minute limit, and we move visitor presentations to just prior to adjournment.
Can we just motion what you just said, or do I have to actually motion to?
Are you comfortable with the
Motion
language?
B2, motion to,
Approve the rules
yes.
with the edits to,
Oh, motion to approve the edits that were just made.
actually, we can move it with the edits, right? We don't need 2 motions.
Correct.
Correct. So you can just motion approval of the
Edits.
rules with, so move approval of the rules as edited or as recommended.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the rules as edited.
I'd like to clarify.
Sure.
Okay. Does that include the earlier discussed edit with
Oh,
the
good point.
January,
Good
or
point.
the quarterly, sorry, quarterly or as needed, or?
So with edits to, you're right, to B2. And I like the language from the, that you had mentioned earlier from the.
Yeah, the ordinance
enabling
language is-
ordinance,
which
just
trumps
using that
everything here,
language.
yeah.
Yep. So with B2 and D2. Those are the only edits. Thank you. I missed that first one. So you want to just,
I think I'll let Dennis do it.
you want to just move?
You motion, I'll second.
I move to accept, or to.
Approve the rules of procedure.
To approve the rules with the noted, or with the edits to B2
And D2.
and D2 as discussed.
I second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Dupee. We have a second from Commissioner Tuchuk. With a motion and a second, do we have any additional discussion? Seeing none, we'll look all in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The motion passes ayes all. All right. We'll hand it back to Mr. Martin for the annual report.
Sure, Chair and Commission, there's a couple actionable items here before we get into the rental licensing discussion. I just want to remind you, I believe Commissioner Finley said he had a time limit to tonight, so we might be a little mindful of the time on these next 2 items. So the annual report is something that obviously we do annually. This is our 2nd year in the new format. You received the full copy with all 4 commissions and the community development staff together in one singular report. The reason for this move to the one unified report was to highlight the work and the coordination that occurs between staff and the commissions to highlight the larger projects and initiatives that are being pushed forward by community development and the commissions. One note, this is our second year into this, looking already forward to next year. We know that generally the format will likely stay the same, but some of the narrative and how we talk about things, we like to kind of take it up a notch and elevate it and talk about themes within each of the commission rather than just focusing on numbers of items reviewed year to year. So we're already starting to think about how we can improve the report, but needing a formal action on approving the Head C report tonight. And then we would look for a representative to be identified to attend the February 25th council meeting to present your report to the council. So with that, staff can take any questions or comments.
So I think first thing to note is we're not going to edit any of the text, right?
Please no. Yeah. Chair and Commission,
It
yeah.
exists.
The reports are printed, and we'll work on that timing this year. We did it
Well,
better
no,
last
good.
year, but yeah, we did reach out informally, and
You did good reach out, so the commission had perfect opportunities, plenty of opportunities to engage, so we're good on that. So really, I think you're really just looking for us to approve it and then say who's going to attend, right? So I'm pulling up my calendar.
Okay, while you're doing that, Commissioner Finley makes a motion to approve the annual review.
So we have a motion from Commissioner Finley to approve the annual review. Do we have a second?
I second.
We have a second as well, so motion and a second. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of approval of the annual report signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Hearing none, passes ayes all. Right now, I am looking at my calendar for the 23rd. I'm going to double check my work calendar.
sorry, 25th of February.
Oh, 25th, Monday, the 25th. Okay. I think I will be able to make that, so I'll be more than happy to take that unless someone else would like to get a chance to see city council meeting and represent the commission.
I will go if you cannot, so you
Okay.
just have to let me know.
Okay. Unless, Dennis? Nope, you're comfortable? Okay. So, Mr. Martin, I will represent, and if for some reason I can't, I'll reach out to Joy and let her know. I'll let you know as well if I can't.
All right, that sounds good. Thank you.
Okay? Okay, where'd I hide my agenda? Okay, so that brings us to election of officers.
Chair and Commission, no staff report attached with this. We look for voice nominations for chairperson and vice chairperson to serve throughout 2019. And then you would vote on those nominations. So I can turn it back to the commission to do so. And if you have any questions or clarifications from staff, we can take it from there.
I would like to open nominations for Mark Jenkins to be chair of HETC.
So we have a motion nominating Mark Jenkins. We do not need seconds on nominations. Any other nominations? And hint, you can self-nominate if you wish. Okay. Before we move ahead with this, also keep in mind, we will also be electing a vice chair. So we'll move on to that next. Any other nominations? That was going twice. Third time. Any other nominations? Hearing none, we have one nomination for myself to continue in the role of chair. Discussion?
Great job, and we'd like you to continue.
Yes, excellent job.
Yep, I agree. A lot of experience and very enthusiastic about it. I love it.
So put
Okay.
down the gavel.
Okay, well, thank you. Actually, I think you're telling me to keep it, not to put it down.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so, thank you. I appreciate the kind words, and I am willing to continue, so I will ask for those all in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed and abstentions. I appreciate the votes, but I will abstain on this one. That makes it a 3 in favor, 1 abstention. That motion passes. Thank you. I will be happy to continue to serve this commission. With that, let's move on to electing a vice chair. And we'll look for nominations for a vice chair.
I nominate Joy to continue as vice chair.
We have a nomination for Commissioner Tkachuk to continue as vice chair. Any other nominations? Commissioner Tkachuk, are you willing to serve another term?
Another term, thank you.
I'll take that as yes. Any other nominations? That's twice. Any other nominations? 3 times. We have a nomination on the floor for Commissioner Tkachuk to continue her service as vice chair. Any discussion? Seeing none. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The motion passes, ayes all, in the eyes of the chair. We now have a vice chair and chair for the next term, Mr. Martin.
Your next item under new business, recent business outreach events, I would suggest that we skip over this item. You did touch on it a bit in item A, but in the interest of time, I think if we could move right into the unfinished business item of the rental licensing,
Sure.
that would be okay with the chair?
Yep.
All right, we will go to an overhead presentation. I'm also going to walk through this somewhat quickly too, just so we get to the heart of the discussion. All these items were in your staff report. There's no new information being presented. But before I get into that, I do want to also point out that the city's building official, Jason Brash, and the city's fire chief, Steve Lucan, are in attendance to be part of the dialogue and answer questions. These are 2 gentlemen that are would be more boots on the ground than I would be on the program itself, and then have also see day-to-day the existing conditions of multifamily units and what's bringing us here today. So here's our agenda just real quickly on what we'll be looking at. So I'm just going to dig in an overview. Again, to remind ourselves why we're looking at this is a council directive. Staff was asked to start development of a rental licensing program. As part of that process, we're engaging the head C as part of that development so that we're ensuring that your feedback and recommendations ultimately are included for council consideration. Part of the overall idea too of why are we looking at a licensing program, it will shift the focus of enforcement from reactive to proactive, looking to get ahead of issues and prevent some of those issues before they even are created and become chronic problems. And the program would work to set minimum standards for buildings and equipment used for housing rentals. I know one of the questions that we answered in your staff report from the last meeting about don't we already have rules in the books that we could apply? Yes, we do, but ultimately, if we have someone that's not adhering to those rules, we don't necessarily have something to take away from them that they can't continue on, and that this would be part of one of those benefits, seems like the wrong word, but one of the tools as part of having a licensing program that you would be able to utilize when working with a chronic issue. And it would also ensure that owners are properly screening rental applicants and understand the consequences of renting to people who aren't law-abiding. So again, it does put some onus on the landlords to ensure that they're doing their due diligence as they rent out properties. This program would work to license and inspect every housing unit that is rented within the city. Again, looking for those minimum standards, minimum space standards per occupant, that life safety items are in place, like a fire detector, the windows are safe, et cetera. Observe and identify if there's hazardous conditions or structural insufficiencies that either the fire department or the building department need to get involved with to elevate the level of a unit to make sure it's at a minimum safety standard. Operationally, the single family and buildings with 4 or less units will be inspected by community development, Jason's division within the building inspections perspective, and then buildings with 5 or more units would be inspected by the fire department and Steve's group. What do we need to move forward? Well, we're doing part of the process here in reviewing such program, but We'll need training for staff, we'll need to develop an application and checklist, so applicants know what the expectations are. A new city code amendment, that's what was attached to your staff report. Again, draft, proposed, first look, staff's expectation is not exactly what gets adopted, but we need a starting point, and that's what you're looking at tonight. A land management system is being implemented. That means software permits. We're going to go to electronic building permits this year, but this software will also allow us to manage and facilitate a licensing program for rentals. So that's kind of one of those unforeseen consequences of developing a program, is that you actually need some back-end capabilities to function this. And also to implement, enforce, and sustain program, staffing increases would be required in the public safety side and community development. And that was incorporated to a certain level in the 2019 budget that was approved by the City Council to facilitate those increases. Some items that the council has directed staff to incorporate in such a program, and also a couple of these items were byproducts of your last review in September. So there's this push-pull item of a cost of operating program, where the initial directive is to make sure that the program is self-sustaining, it pays for itself, but then also this idea of offering incentives to property owners that have well-performing properties that perhaps they don't need to be inspected or is licensed as often. In doing that, understand the need and desire for that, there potentially then is a revenue offset that occurs. And we'll talk about how we're at least initially looking at from the staff side of how to offer that incentive, but just keep in the back of your mind, if there's less inspections or a license now goes from 1 year to 3 years, well, there's a fiscal impact of not collecting as much revenue as you might of a different type of program. And then also the staffing proposals, and we'll get into a little more in depth on what will be considered for where that staffing would occur, and then the program elements, including the public safety elements into the ordinance. So that means those background checks, the lease requirements, the crime-free aspects that, we were directed by the council to include that into this ordinance, as well as inspecting the structure of the unit itself to make sure those are safe. Already mentioned many of this. The third item is what I would focus on, is that the intent with this new program and additional staffing would to say a license program is ultimately adopted, that's not when we're done with our education and engagement aspect, that we would continue to work with property owners and landlords and property managers on those educational aspects and outreach, and having quarterly topical meetings, kind of like what we discussed on the business side and those business council meetings, but this would be focused on rental management. I won't read all these are 8 bullet points that were included with your staff report, but these are the items that are the highlight, big picture items that are included in the draft ordinance that's before you, and we just wanted to pull out again what that kind of means at the end of the day. So again, it's the crime-free aspect, rental properties passing an inspection with the housing inspector and with the fire department to make sure that those units are safe, setting up certain standards for owners and property managers, both that they're doing their background checks and that they're using written leases for tenants, where that we know there's properties in Maplewood where you can rent today and there's not a written lease attached to it. So again, setting standards, and that's, at the end of the day, that's a protection for the tenant themselves as well, to make sure they know what their rights are and what they're agreeing to as far as renting an apartment. So again, a couple more items on the public safety side with the background investigation for the property owners themselves, adding that lease addendum from crime-free, drug-free housing. And the third item on this one is it's always been a big point for, especially on the public safety side, about having a 24-hour contact information on the books for a property. So if an issue is happening on the weekend, overnight, that a responding police officer or firefighter has a way to access information to get to someone who is in charge of the building. So that this is seen as a key point of requirement through the licensing program, that we would be able to know who we can contact. We're not proposing it here, but there, and I know this was part of Mr. Unger's comments, there are ordinances in the Twin Cities that require that contact person to be able to respond within 60 minutes. And that's codified in there that they will be required to respond within an hour. We're not going in that direction at this point, but it can get a little tighter or tougher, I guess, what we've seen elsewhere. And then the last point is the city manager ultimately having the ability to deny or not renew a license. And then the city council then would have to confirm those actions if a tenant or property issues become chronic. The incentivizing program, what we're looking to do is create a series of, we're not trying to make this overly burdensome and trying to make it sure at the end of the day it's pretty straightforward as to what the expectations are. But if you're a good performing property based on your inspections and you don't have violations or as many violations, you're going to get a longer term on that license and less frequent inspections. If you're having issues with the property, then that term of the license will be shorter, meaning more inspections until you can prove out that your property is meeting all those code requirements. So if you might be a 1-year type C license this year, but if you can get over those issues, you would be able to work yourself into having a longer term. So this is one idea that we've seen that seemed to work well for what we're being asked to incorporate into such a license. Now this like chart itself and wouldn't necessarily be codified, but what's in the ordinance is directing the city manager to develop a policy which then would be adopted by council to create such a schedule that we'd be looking at. So again, we kind of talked about these. There's the back end stuff, say once the ordinance is adopted, you need the software to manage it, staffing to support it. These are the specific staffing increases that we're predicting needed to be. On the community development side, we would add an inspector that would focus on this program. We have an existing unfilled 0.6 administrative position that we would make full-time. Similar on the fire department side and public safety, where they would take their administrative staff person and make that a full-time position, while also reworking how the fire marshal works in the city, where it's a contracted position now, and converting that into a full-time battalion chief of inspection / fire marshal position. So I'm taking that contract employee and making them a full-time internal employee, and then also adding a police officer to manage the program and to conduct some of those, or to lead the coordination of those outreach efforts. The fee structure, just to give you an idea of what fees we're kind of talking about. Again, this is pretty consistent with the Twin Cities that we're finding in the other communities within the metro. Could be a bit on the higher side if we went with the average, and again, that's with the directive of trying to make this as cost neutral as possible. That's a consideration that has to be made as far as where those fees land. On the flip side, there's an argument probably to be made that all properties, regardless if you're rental or not, are benefiting from such a program. If you're a single-family homeowner that lives on the same block as an apartment building or down the street, this potentially helps you and your livability as well. So this is something to keep in mind. So really the structure that you typically see and that we would be looking to move forward is that there's an annual license fee for the structure itself. So anywhere from $100 to $300 for the overall building. And that would be the same for a single family home or if it's a 100-unit building. But then you would move into the per unit fee, and this would only be charged when it's your year to be inspected. So if you get that 3-year license, you're paying this once every 3 years. If you've had issues with violations, you could be inspected every year, and then you would be charged that fee every year. So again, like a project like Frost English Silver could have a fee approximately in the $5,000 area. But we know that they were just approved for a certificate of occupancy in the fall, so they probably would have initially qualified for a 3-year license, so they're paying that once every 3 years instead of every year. And again, a single-family home would just be pay on that 1 unit basis, so potentially $100 to $300. There would be fees attached with if there had to be re-inspections and violations. So you can see it, that's on the bottom of this slide. So the first re-inspection, there's no charge, but if you go to that second and third, in addition, there would be additional fees associated. And then also if you fail to register or miss your time to renew, there would be potentially a fee there after a 30-day grace period. So process-wise, we brought this to you on the 20th of September last year. We refined and got more details to the program that we're bringing forward to tonight. Hopefully provided some follow-up information for your questions last fall. We're planning a series of informational meetings, looking at some public meetings, one in February, one in March, that we would hold, one in kind of the early evening, one during the day, knowing that lots of these properties are managed by professional companies that would be probably wanting to meet more during the middle of the day than at the nighttime, but we wanted to provide a couple different meeting on different days and different times of the day. And then we're looking to have a robust online engagement with some of the tools that the city uses, and knowing that we have lots of emails, or can gather lots of emails for these property owners. And so we're trying, and we're going to put in there Maplewood Living and get an article in the review. And so looking at a few different ways to get the word out. And then a couple council meetings before anything was ultimately adopted, including a public hearing where all interested parties for and against would have the opportunity to talk directly to their council. And that would occur near the end of the process, but still this spring is the idea. So with that, I spit a lot of information out at you. I again want to emphasize we have more technical experts on the fire and building side here. So if you have questions, please utilize them as resources. I'm kind of a process guy and know how to write ordinances, but these guys know what this kind of program would actually do on the field. So with that, I'll turn it back to the commission.
Okay, and then just to clarify, at this point in the process, you're looking for discussion from us, not a vote of support. At some point in the future, will this come before us again? Where, because to be honest, when we get closer to it, I would like us to have, a vote of support, even if we're not, just to get our support on the record, or not support, whatever that vote might be.
Chair and Commission, thank you for mentioning that. That's one item I forgot to include on that slide, is that the intent is after the engagement meetings,
right,
we would bring it back to your April meeting is what we're targeting, so that we would provide you that information, so you have the benefit of, here's what we've heard, here's some of the changes that we're thinking could help some of the issues that were being identified, and then yes, ultimately we would look for a formal recommendation to the City Council when we're at that point.
Okay. Noting the time and noting time schedule, I think I'm going to immediately go to Commissioner Finley and see what his thoughts and comments and questions are.
First question is for Chief Lucan. It noted in there that you would do inspections of 5 or more units. Currently, obviously new construction, if it's at a certain size, you have to do an inspection, like with the brand new building at Frost and English, right? You went in there and did an inspection. What is the current regulations for existing structures? So if we were to jump out 10 years from now, is there already a mechanism in place that you go back and review the building at Frost and English?
Commissioner, that's a very good question, and the answer to that is yes. Currently now we do our life safety inspections, and our life safety inspections in any units 5 or more at this time really consist of strictly the common areas. We do not go into any of the units per se to do that, as this would require to be done. So right now, we would go in, and then we would go in, and our firefighters that would be on that day that would have those units to go inspect. We do all the common areas. We check all the smokes. We make sure the system, when the last time it was tested and taken care of. We make sure all the fire extinguishers are done. We make sure all the doorways are opening and closing properly and latch. And we make sure that anything more fire-related type of things. Also then, throughout the year, as we go, if we get calls to those locations on fire alarms, false alarms, which we average over 200 of those a year. As we go to those places, and we keep track of those, and then we're able to go back later in that year as we inspect it to say, okay, what have you done to reduce some of these? Were some of those things that we had said at the time taken care of? But one of the big things is that it's really important to point out is that in many of these things that we do or we ask them to do, we're taking their word for it. Now, if it's a significant offense, like their system has not been cleaned or taken care of or maintenance for 2 years, we will stay with that. If it's a matter of we come in and we say that light is out, that exit light is out, we expect them to do that. we take their word for them to do it. We just don't have the time or the people to be going back after a lot of those little things. So we look for what we would call, just like in the EMS business, high acuity type things that are most important to life safety, and those we will go back and check. In this process that we have here through the rental license, that would be we would go back on many more things to take a look at rather than just those high acuity.
To recap, right now you do inspect units of 5 or more already.
We try to each year get to every one of those units, 5 or more. I will be very honest, not every year do we do that, but we try to get to most of those. We do, however, just as Michael had mentioned, is that we go to the places that we have the most false alarms, most problems with more than we do those that don't.
Thank you.
You bet.
Anything else? Other thoughts or questions? I want to respect your time, so
I
since there's
appreciate
no
that. I don't
vote,
wanna-
you can get up and head out when you need to, but
I'm still struggling with just the burden of, individual wants to rent out their house. It's a $100 fee is what's roughly being proposed per unit or for the structure. If you're a single-family house, and then you pay that once, and if you get a good score, then hopefully every 3 years and not every year. It's not a huge burden, but it is a burden. And one of the big things that stood out to me in this was, oh dear, I lost my spot. Too many papers here. Remember, it was the letter N. I just got to find my right document.
In that draft.
That was that one. Must be this one.
get that one. Or were you looking at the,
It was where
did you want the actual
with the police
ordinance?
chief, and I realize the police chief isn't here, but I mean, that's, to me, there's a lot of, I believe that the majority of people are very law-abiding and well-intentioned and good. It's the bad apples out there that you need to address. And so I'm just still struggling in my mind, is this the right tool to address the bad apples? There was a note in there about the police officer, was it letter M or N? If they get an excessive amount of calls to a property, it seems to imply this would give more teeth for the police to take action with the landlord. I don't know if I'm making sense. What I'm saying is, okay, so say you have a landlord that is just renting to anybody, and they're just really not taking pride in ownership, and not, they're just letting anybody in, and there's so bad tenants are coming in, and they're creating a lot of burden. The police are getting called out there on a regular basis. I don't know what tools are in place currently for the police to take action. I assume that this helps in that endeavor to take action. To your point earlier, Mr. Martin, you can take away now their permit. So I guess that, to me, is the upside of this, is you have to have a permit, you're not behaving yourself, we can take it away, you're no longer a rental, and that can hit you in your pocketbook, which gets your attention real fast. So that's just my general overview comment, is the struggle of burdening everybody with this $100 fee. The average Joe that's, law-abiding and just wants to simply rent their house out, making them pay that fee so that we have a tool or a stronger action that we can take on those few bad apples.
And I'm kind of having to agree with you on the single-family dwelling, Brian, in that, okay, so you've got an aging community in Maplewood, and some of these people go down to Florida now and spend 6 months gone. They want to rent their house out, so that they have some income. Now they have to go and, know all the rules that they have to go through the inspection. it's an older home, maybe it doesn't meet, and maybe that's a good thing because you don't want to be renting, something that's unsafe, but they're law-abiding. They don't probably know the process. They're going to have to, I don't know, acclimate to it.
And Chair and Commission, just on that specific point, there, in the exemptions, that scenario for snowbirds, it's even used in the ordinance, they are exempted if it's for a period of 120 consecutive days or less. Now, because there could be an argument if you're doing 6 or more, or, whatever the number is it worthy of being exempted if you're going to have a program like this? But there was some thought put into that type of scenario, and there could be other scenarios that if you wanted to be considered, that could be put.
Well, and I think that's why we have to hear back from the community. And,
Right.
and that's why I'm really looking forward to, the community engagement.
Absolutely.
Some of the,
That's how I feel. I'm wondering if we really want this to go all the way down to a single-family rental unit. I understand on the commercial properties, when you've got 5 or more units, or even maybe 4 or more units, but when like I said, I'm anxious to hear the feedback from the community if they feel single-family homes should be included in this. The other side note I added, and then I'll hit the road, is with Airbnb. I didn't see Airbnb mentioned anywhere in here, and I didn't see a time parameter frame to make it, because inevitably that's somehow going to come up in this. And I'm just raising the issue. I don't know, Mr. Martin, how much that's been discussed.
Yeah, I want to extend on it too, because you talked about the 120 days exemption. Is it to the same tenant for 120 days, or is it that the unit is a rental for 120 days? Because that certainly will then help us define where's the border between an Airbnb and a rental property.
Well, Chair and Commission, part of it would be, what do you want to see in it? Because this is all malleable and fluid. But the intent that, as written, was that it would be to one. Doesn't matter if you rented it every 30 days, it would still be renting it 120 days or less, you're exempt, regardless of who you're doing it to. We've seen examples where you could exempt, depending on how you wanted to go, exempt Airbnbs up to 30 days or make them get a license or prohibit it. I've seen, there's every example in the metropolitan area of how that's been dealt with. And so we weren't necessarily looking to tackle that with this ordinance, but we could exempt them out if there was a desire for that. Chief, did you have, I know he just wanted to comment on one of the questions that have been presented too.
Commissioner, thank you. As a member of the public safety team, and that as we work so closely together on these things, as Commissioner Finley brought up in regards to the $100, one of the big things we see is that when we go into some of those homes, they will rent, and it starts out as 2 people living there, and before you know it, there's 4 or 5, and now we have people living in basements and rooms that don't have the proper egress, and so we overcrowded it. So it is important that we go down to that level for their safety, for the people who are there. So this is kind of a two-way street. So that $100 they will pay will also help protect the rent or the owner as well. And that would come back on the background checks and such. I would assume, and I probably shouldn't use that word, but I would assume that anyone who is out there as a renter is not going to want to rent to someone who is going to be a problem to their facility. I mean, I just believe that. However, is that by doing that and having to have to do the background checks, that will enlighten that owner as to what type of a person you're putting in here. Now, taking the word of mouth is one thing, but actually doing, especially the criminal history, and is that someone you want to put into your facility? The other side of it is, too, is that in many cases, the renter might be just fine. That was there, who signed the lease and was a part of it, but the people that they bring to stay there with them, the people that they bring, become those not wanted and do cause the problem. So it is very important that it stays at all levels of rental that we have here.
And Chair and Commission, just to add one other thought, Chief Nadeau, the police chief, Director of Public Safety, added a comment to me that I can relay, and he had another commission. There's a Police Civil Service Commission at the fire station tonight, so otherwise he'd be here as well. But he added about, especially on the single-family homes, they are engaging in a business enterprise by renting their apartment or their house out, and that they likely lack the experience to do a lot of these things that would be required, and so that's why the educational component and requirements would be part of it. So again, if they're going to engage in the business aspect of renting out their house, that they're going to have to get to a certain level of knowledge about how do you do it then, so that they're an effective landlord, both for themselves and protecting their rights, and then for who they lease to.
And that's a resource that the city will provide?
Chair and Commission, there already are those educational resources that are already out there and that they can be pointed to. Some cities do provide that, but that's where, if, when you noticed under the staff, potential staff additions, that the police department would add a staff person that would work on those outreach engagement efforts that, yeah, potentially then we would look to hold the classes ourselves.
Thank you.
Other thoughts or comments?
No, it's good discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm also excited to see what the community has to say and learn more about this myself. My inclination is that this could lead to a safer Maplewood in some ways, whether it's from a crime perspective or from a structural, fire safety and whatnot perspective. So my inclination is, at this point, my inclination would be to support it. I think that was a really good point brought up in terms of, even a single family home could, in certain cases, although it may be rare, could be, in a number of violations. And I do think there's probably I know that there's extra costs, or there's, the idea is that these fees will pay for the extra staff, but I do think there could also be cost savings, I imagine, by, if there are reductions in crime reductions in these fire incidents or whatever incidents are, false alarms, all these other things that are costly and do take resources. So I don't know, my inclination, without having spent an exhaustive amount of time on it, is that it's mostly positive.
Okay, so I'll jump in, and I'm going to dovetail off of the safety and the security part of it. And I do want to share, not that my concerns are as passionate as the gentleman who spoke at the city council meeting, not the last one, I think it was the one prior when this was first introduced to council. But there was a young man who was very passionate about the community of people, many of them in the rental community, who may face mental health issues, have criminal records, but are now, well-respected members of the community. We want to just be aware that those people are there too, and while we want to make sure the community is safe, we want to, in all honesty, we want to help our renters make sure they're renting to the right people. I don't think we can execute this program to the point where someone with a criminal history can't rent a property in Maplewood. Someone with mental health challenges can't rent in Maplewood. We need to make sure people understand that's not the intent of this. We want to make sure that for those people who have those challenges, that we're trying to make it a safe environment for them with their renters, and we want to set the ground rules up front. But I want to make sure we communicate that too. Oftentimes, this can get portrayed as, we just want to keep the bad guys out of town, and that's not the intent. Now, if you're a really bad guy and you're a repeated bad guy, and our people probably know it, guess what? You probably won't be too upset if you decide to live somewhere else. But, again, it's not the intent to try to clean up the city just with a rental ordinance. And Chief, if you want to comment on any of this too, please feel free to come up. But I just want to make sure that message gets out. What would you like to add?
Chairman, I just want to confirm what you had said. That is no way our intent. Our intent is to help the renters as it is the rentals. And so what we get today is, many of our calls that we get today are actually from the renters saying, this, and this has been happening. We've talked. We tried to get this taken care of. And we have those who do a great job watching out for their community, which I call their apartment unit as such, that if they see that a fire extinguisher has been used and hasn't been refilled, we'll get the calls on those. So this is really a two-way street. And I think part of this will help foster that communication between the owner and the renters to make it a much better and safer place for everyone. And we're just going to be there to support both sides and to make sure that the things that are very, very important to the life safety of the renters, and then also to give the renter or the owner of the building, you know, some clout to be able to manage that as well, I think could be a win for everyone.
So along that line, one of the items in the key points of the draft ordinance says owners or their property managers are required to, and the term in the document is screen all potential tenants, but then it continues, by using a written rental application. I'm not sure I would consider that screening per se. So maybe, Chief, I might ask you to come back up again. To what degree do I, as a renter, someone who owns that rental property, give me an idea of what a realistic screening expectation you would have of me to make sure that my renters, and you've already addressed my guest and stuff are different, but the person who signs the rental agreement, to what degree do we really need to screen them?
Well, and that's a very good question, Chairman. So really what we're looking for in this rental agreement that we would have is, and there are some places, some rental places within the city that use nothing. It's more of a verbal thing, or it says that if you do something 30 days, or if this breaks, those types of things. So what this will be is a more formal, and I don't know that screening is necessarily the word, right, but what it's going to do, it's going to ask for certain criteria that you're going to have to present to them that'll be in the contract that you'll have to do. And within that contract, it'll talk about, you know, the safe housing, it will talk about a safe community, you know, those kinds of things, so that you're aware of it, you acknowledged it. And then that also then, if there are major issues that occur with the renter, then that also helps the renter. At the same time then, that will also help the renter with the owner as to if he's not living up to his bargain by maybe there's some people he rented to next door, that this agreement will work both ways. So it screens, in a sense, I think, that it provides them with a little bit more information of who they are, and then it also then gives them the opportunity to have everything up front that both parties are expected.
Okay, cool, thank you. So I've got one other item, but I'm going to say to me, and I'll look for comments from staff to make me feel more comfortable about this, but the license types and inspection schedules, to me, my thought is, if I'm going to license a property, whether I am a well-behaved renter or I am running, you know, the worst den of thieves, you know, that Maplewood's ever seen, to me, a license to rent property, I think, would be easier to enforce and inform if that license was an annual license, regardless of my level of compliance. I would then say adjust the fees according to my good or bad behavior, because here's my concern. You already had mentioned earlier, Mr. Martin, that if we have everyone on a 3-year license, the income, the financial support for the program is a lot less than if we were to have everyone on the type D license, which is 6 months. You know, I'd love to have the problem that all of our renters are so good that we can't afford to have the program because they're all on type A licenses. My concern then is, if we were to get into that scenario, do we all of a sudden start licensing not out of a behavior scenario, but out of a fiscal scenario, where we need to maintain a certain level of licensing to keep the program fiscally neutral, as we're trying to achieve? So my concern is, I understand the sliding scale, but I'd love to see some commitment that if we are all type A three-year licenses, the program is still sustainable. That might make me feel better. But my concern is, what if I'm a renter with 3 properties and one's a type A and one's a type B and one's a type D? How do I remember which property is under which when I pay it, as opposed to, hey, I got to pay my licensing fee every first Monday in January or whatever it is? Yeah, we certainly have to change the scale of what the license fees are, but I think repeatable, consistent is going to make it easier for the renters than trying to remember which type am I this year.
Chair and Commission, so there's a few ways that we can approach this, and so you've seen one way that we put in the staff report. Another way is that you can be licensed every year regardless, like you're getting at, and there's a fee associated with that, and that, but the inspection cycle could operate on a different term of years, and that when it's your year to be inspected, then on multifamily buildings, they would then be charged an additional fee based on their unit count. So say it's $150 every year for your license regardless, and then you're inspected every 2 years, then you pay the $30 per unit fee that year. And it's, we'd be, part of why we're investing so much on the administrative side is because there's gonna be a lot of administrative work with facilitating this program, but that's where we would lean on the software that we're implementing that would do a lot of those notifications for us and keep us on that rotation schedule where it's not just someone being like, with a spreadsheet, where are we at? A third way is an example like in Minneapolis where the fees are, it's just, you're licensed and but your fee, every year you pay a license and you're inspected every year. But your fees are determined based on which tier you fall into based on inspection records. So a few different ways to approach it there.
Yeah. And I should clarify, I still am a fan, I would support your inspections are periodic based on your level of compliance. But from a financial, just paying the bills side, I pay my license fee on an annual basis, but there is a fee for the inspection, consider it a fee for your renewal, if you will. And if you pass for 3 years, I still pay my annual fee, but my renewal is up in 2022 as opposed to 2020, something like that regard, just to make it consistent. I know it means a reworking, but I just think it would be tough to communicate to the renters. I also think it may make it a little more challenging for the community to understand when is this a compliance fee and when does this become just a fiscal licensing issue to keep the program fair. Sure. Those would be my comments on the system on the presentation as it is today.
Sure, and Chair and Commission, one other thing I'd like to add is that internally we've had discussions with, implementing a new program, and it's a revenue generator versus you're having staff costs to operate the program, that we'd want to do, especially because it's a new program, at least an annual revisit on what's working, what's not, what needs to be tweaked, not necessarily looking to change the conditions or the fees constantly under people, but I know of several communities that have implemented an ordinance like this and then 5 years later made some pretty significant changes because they structured needed to alter the program to better fit what their intent is. So I just want to communicate that with a commitment from the staff side that we're not looking just to throw a program in the ordinances and say, this is it, that we want to be constantly doing that evaluation to make sure it's effective and really staying true to why we're doing this in the first place. And, from the staff side, no one's doing this with the idea of revenue or anything like that being generated, but we also know that there is a cost side of it and that we're working to be mindful of how do you address that as well.
Cool.
I just had a quick question. How are hotels and things like that inspected?
Chair and Commission, I'm going to ask guys that do inspections. I don't know.
I mean, because we're talking about this, I'm just like,
Chairman, yes, a very good question. And we do the same as we do for the apartment units as well. Check the common areas. I can't speak for the building department, but we do check the common areas and that. And also keep in mind is that both the building department and the fire department are very close together. Any new constructions or remodeling, we both go hand in hand to go in to make sure that the proper codes have been taken care of and they're ready to be open, those sections, and do that. So we go back then later on throughout the process to make sure they're all kept up into, the codes are met and are kept up.
so is there any difference, like, if it's a senior center versus, you know, I mean, the type of people that are in there, so you know that in a senior center, people are going to be slower to get out if there's an evacuation and things like that?
You know, that's another great question, Commissioner. What we really do is that any of our inspections we do are based on the building. However, again, as of right now, we only inspect the common areas. So we don't get into each one of the separate units to look at, or even a few of them to look at. So when we do those and we plan for those, is yes, we do look at, we make sure the hallways are clear. We make sure that the entrances, the doors are easy to get in and out. If it's handicap accessible, we make sure all of those buttons and doors, those types of things work in all buildings to be safe. And in many of our buildings today that are sprinkled, and we're one of the very lucky communities that as we have grown and started much earlier than others to start putting sprinklers in almost every building, we're to a point where we're really doing well in that area. And so having sprinklers in that building, in many cases, we can have our seniors shelter in place. So in other words, unless it's within their apartment or on their floor, and many times we'll have them shelter right in place because we do have the sprinkler systems and everything to take care of. And many of our units too that we go to of our senior housing will be handed a sheet when we get there saying these folks on these rooms, on these floors need extra assistance. And then at that time then we'll look at other ways to help them, or we'll commit manpower to go get them in that time. So we do treat them a little differently than we do an apartment building.
So does this new rental housing, do those senior housing units fall under this, or is that something else?
They would fall under the same process.
They would fall under this process?
They would.
So then, it's a possibility that their units would be checked then?
As randomly, however we end up with the program to doing that, yes.
And Chair and Commission, just based on how the ordinance is set up, there is a difference between like senior housing and nursing homes, where what would be exempted are Department of Health licensed facilities, which would include rest homes or nursing homes and rest homes, because they're already licensed under a different function and inspected in a different way. But they're a different type of facility than, like, say, Frost English Silver, which is senior housing technically, and so.
Yeah, I was looking at the one on East Shore Drive.
Okay. Any other thoughts, commissioners?
No, I appreciate, I think the questions that we had when we met last, I like, I appreciate the work that went into answering those specific questions, so I just want to give credit to that.
And you'll get to do it again with all the public feedback as well, and
yes,
we look forward to it and welcome it.
And Chair and Commission will make a commitment from staff to make sure that it's communicated to you when those meetings would occur and where and all that information. They're not just geared to property owners or landlords. They'll be for everyone. We have a little harder time engaging or getting the engagement word out to all the renters because there's not a super effective way other than using like our Maplewood Living and the newspaper to get the word out, and we'll use our social media. So we're hoping that renters get engaged as part of this process as well.
And actually, Mr. Martin, thank you for bringing that up. Please do and message us when those events take place. We start the meeting talking about how engaged we are with our business community, but, to the point, we're the Housing and Economic Development Commission, and I think if, commissioners are available for those public meetings, let's be there. We can hear from our housing community as well. Cool. With that, I think we move on to visitor presentations. Chief, our only visitors heading out, hightailing it for the door. Thank you very much, Chief. Commission presentations. Actually, I want to add sort of ad hoc on commission presentations here. Just a notification. I haven't had a chance to check the website, but if you're watching this, you probably pay a little attention to Maplewood. We do have 2 council seats open. My understanding is the application process will probably begin tomorrow at some point. There will be applications available on the city website for that appointment. If you're looking to get engaged with the city, we have an opening on the Housing and Economic Development Commission that's, if you want to engage at this level. But man, if you really want to crank it up, there are 2 open city council seats, and that's an opportunity for any Maplewood resident to get engaged and be part of that process. So watch the City of Maplewood website some point tomorrow. They'll post the application and the process. Know that there's an opportunity to continue to engage or get more engaged with the City of Maplewood. I just wanted to make that shout out on that opportunity. Any other council or commission presentations? With that, we go to staff presentations, the development summary. Mr. Martin.
Chair and Commission, just a few items to walk through as this time of year leading into the beginning of the year is usually a little slower period on the development side. So we just have 3 projects, smaller in scale really, but the first one, 1690 McKnight Road. This is on the corner of McKnight and Larpenteur, existing a shopping center. The owner requested approval of conditional use permit, which was ultimately granted by the City Council for a laundromat that was occupying existing vacant space within the center. They're currently building out that area still, right, Jason? They're not?
Correct. They're still constructing the laundromat.
So that hasn't opened yet, but that would be later this year. No exterior changes to the building itself. This was all an internal function.
So the laundromat, then, if I'm right, is that all of the space under construction that would be the east side of the building? Because I thought did I see a Starbucks sign in that building, or did I just misread it driving by?
There's no Starbucks in that location.
Okay, so it looks like almost a third of that building on the east side is under construction, so that's the laundromat we're looking at?
Yep,
okay.
Correct. There is a Starbucks rumored, and it's more than rumor, but looking at the building out here on White Bear and County Road B.
Okay.
They're still having to figure out some lease issues out, but coffee shops have been interested in that, and it was latest Starbucks that we were told.
So whoever's contracted to provide the city office's coffee is a little worried right now?
Yeah, there you go. Yes.
Okay.
All right, so yeah, that's ongoing project. The second item here, this is just south of where we're at today at 1800 White Bear Avenue. It's the former Junior Achievement Building. There was a conditional use permit request, and again, ultimately approved by the City Council for a group that's looking to kind of do a collection of uses. Banquet hall would be the largest part of the building, which was why the CUP was required, but also a restaurant. And a restaurant focusing on Asian flavors, and a bar, sports bar, would be included. But they're also on the buildings of good size, so they're looking at part of it also for a fitness center and some offices. So kind of again a collection of uses, but there is a kind of a stated demand or a need for gathering spaces like this for some of the Asian communities that are in St. Paul and Maplewood, and this is one of the spaces that they're looking to fill out.
But I will say, I talked to them at council when they presented their CUP, and, open invitation to anyone to come on in and try it out, so I'm taking them up on it. When they're open, we're gonna go try it out. So
sure.
While it may have a Hmong community center feel, they said absolutely it's open to the greater community as well.
Great. And this is another project where, because it's a building site in place, no exterior changes were part of the approval at this point. If they ever wanted to update the facade or do any site improvements, it would have to go through the city's Community Design Review Board, but that wasn't part of what they're looking to do at this point.
Now, there was some discussion of landscaping changes, though.
Sure, yeah, as part of the conditional use permit. So those would be minor changes to the site that we would approve at the staff level, but to help mitigate some of the headlights and potential just view shed of the property owners on the other side of White Bear, some additional landscaping requirements were put in place along the kind of
the white.
The boulevard there's not really a boulevard there, but they would add a boulevard with some screening.
So there were residences over here that were concerned. So, okay.
All right. Then our final project is actually one that's pending. Went to the Planning Commission this Tuesday night. There's an empty auto repair business at 1955 County Road D East, up on the north side of County Road D in the north end part of the city. So if you start from White Bear, you got Wendy's and Taco Bell, and then the site as you move west. The Car Buying Company is the name of the company. They have a location in St. Louis Park, looking to add another one in Maplewood. They need a conditional use permit for used auto sales, so that will go to the city council on January 28th for consideration of approval. This is another project where no exterior changes are proposed. The only changes that they would initially be doing are internal, so if they ever move forward with more external changes, they again would have to go through the city's design review process.
How long has that building been vacant?
Chair and Commission, it's been, Jason, it's been a few years. I would say close to 4 or 5 years. So that's all we have for projects that have been reviewed by the Planning Commission and CDRB since your last meeting, construction or development projects.
Yep. So I probably won't get my map up quick enough to help pinpoint where it is. For this property, were there any regulations put on vehicles parked in a limit of for sale vehicles on the property?
Chair and Commission, no, there's been a couple smaller used auto lots that have had, like, you can only have 12. This one, it's limited in the sense that there's only so much parking. So we took the existing parking spaces versus the office part of the building. So they have to provide 8 parking spaces for customers plus another 3 for employees. So if you took all the parking spaces, you have to net out 11 that can't have merchandise essentially, or autos or cars, but they can put cars in the rest of the parking areas then for on sale. So we wouldn't necessarily be looking to regulate how many cars are you selling on site versus are you maintaining the parking spaces for customer availability that the code would require.
And the reason I bring it up is I remember there was I believe it was a used car business on County Road E, fronting on 36, and there was some discussion, and I thought some conditions in the CUP about signage and all of that, and I'd swear a year later, there were the triangle, strings from light poles and all over the place. Just curious, to what degree we've put those conditions on this and to what degree we can hold them accountable.
Sure. Well, Chair and Commission, so if for a lot of those things that you described on the signs would be against the sign code today regardless of CUP. So if you see it again and we haven't gotten onto it already, let us know. Okay. So you wouldn't need a conditional use permit to regulate it to begin with. The other ones that we've had recently where you did limit how many cars on site were more in nature, due to the nature that they were in multi-tenant buildings.
Right.
And so making sure that, they're using only a certain amount of space so that the other businesses on site are able to function, where this is a sole operator for this property. So we're not, again, concerned with how many cars are selling at any one time. They're also gonna have cars inside the building for sale that customers would come look at. So really, at the end of the day, what we wanna make sure that we're maintaining on this site is enough parking for customers based on the code requirements to come to the site and be able to park, and that they're not parking at Taco Bell and walking across or something like that.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
What is I'm not sure if you have this available. To the left of that, is that like Midas or something like that? Or to the west, I should say, in this picture?
Yeah, Chair and Commission, maybe Jason knows for sure, but I know there's a few auto-related entities on the north side of D as you go west, and I believe that's another, I forget if it's, I know Tires Plus is there, I just can't remember the order.
But is the parking lot separate then?
Correct, it is.
Yeah, so Commissioner Dupree, the next one to the west is Midas, the one after that is Tires Plus.
Okay.
Then Maplewood Kinder Care, and then the new, and by the way, really good-looking pediatric dentistry building.
Yep.
They did a nice job, I really like
Which
that.
used to be an auto-related building that they converted.
And then if you want to go way back in history, right next to the Amco transmission building, before OfficeMax extended, was an Egghead Software.
Oh, wow.
I worked there, yes.
That far back.
That far back, yes.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say Best Buy.
You have to go back to the microfiche in
Best
the
Buy.
historical records for that one.
And stuff. But that's all I have for you tonight, Commissioners.
Okay. Well, with that, then,
I move to
Well-
adjourn.
We've got a motion to adjourn. That's all I need. We will call this meeting adjourned at 8:08.